the free hit versus the wild card. So just to quickly go over it for anyone that's unaware of the differences, a wild card is unlimited transfers between one game week to the next that cost you no money, and your team stays the way that you made all the changes to. The free hit, which was a chip they introduced 2 years ago, um, is an individual week of unlimited transfers. But at the end of that week, it's like midnight and Cinderella's chariot turns back into a pumpkin and you have your shitty team from a week ago. So there's a lot to that. The free hit is a get out of jail free card, in my opinion. It's for the small game week with 4 or 5 matches. It's for the person who has 2 big injuries or has 2 guys on red card suspensions that are always locked in starters and doesn't have a bench that plays. It's a way around a one-time mistake, where the wild card is ultimately, by far, for me, the most important of all the chips, because it allows you to set your team for a sustained period of time if you do it properly. And it also allows you to correct major mistakes. Paul and I, Bickler, as most of you know him from the Monday podcast, both of us hit the panic button in week 3 last year and wild carded out of our garbage hot mess first 2-week lineups. And it didn't work for either of us, I don't think, because it took us about 10 to 15 more weeks before we were even kind of competitive. So we'll start with you, Mateusz. And I should mention, the wild card is you get 2 of them a year. One to be played in the first half and one to be played in the second half. And we'll talk about the uniqueness of this year in a moment. But Mateusz, as a whole, where do you rate the wild card? And have you learned anything from the couple years that you've been playing in ways that you might be able to better maximize the use of probably the most important chip in the game?
Yeah, and you just said it right there. You asked me where I ranked it, and wildcard for me is going to be the most important chip in the game. I think the last couple of years, kind of like you mentioned with yourself and Bickler, I base my reactions of the first 2 weeks a little bit too heavily sometimes, and then I think, okay, the way this happened the first 2 weeks, I have to change my entire team to make do what I've just seen, instead of kind of. Because usually I have this plan, like you said, the first 5-6 weeks, I would love to go without any big changes, kind of have the vision that I have. And then after the 6 weeks, then kind of look back and see what's going on and see what change I have to make from there. The problem that I fall in every year so far is that I get too gung-ho about seeing someone doing well and seeing someone on my team not doing well, and I want to change the whole thing, I want to blow it up. So the biggest thing that I've learned is kind of just, I think, patience. Because I listened to an episode, this YouTube channel recently, and he interviewed the guy that won the entire fantasy Premier League last year, and the guy said that he didn't use his chips, all 3 of them or all 4 of them, until the last 5-6 game weeks. And to me, I was just stunned, because I can't picture myself going through the whole first half of the season without making major changes like that. But I guess that kind of goes into planning too. If you plan out the first 18, let's say just on average, first 18 game weeks well enough to where you kind of have a vision of where you want to move players and who you want to move them to, you can get away without using those chips, so long as nothing terrible happens to any of your players. So I think patience is the one thing that I've learned most. And it's going to be something that it's hard to do, because you see these returns from some of these guys, you get really excited. You're like, I want to go for this guy. I want to get this guy. I want to be able to move my entire team around. But then ultimately you kind of fall in the same trap of, okay, but in a couple weeks that's going to happen again to someone else, and now I don't have the resources to do that. So now what do I do? Like, am I just going to keep trying to follow what's happening and then be behind? Because like you said, if you're not taking a gamble, you're not going to get ahead. But if you're following too much, you're going to stay behind. So you kind of have to find that right balance in between those 2 aspects.
Yeah, Timucin, with you with the wild card, the free hits, the differences obviously are pretty stark. Your team reverts back, or it's a one-time um, commitment to changes, right? And then you go back to the prior squad that you had. How do you look at the wild card? And after playing probably last year the most consistently that you have for any full season, right? Week in, week out, which is basically means he played 25 of the 38 instead of 6.
Basically,
Yeah. Uh, how would you say?
sad but true.
Yeah, 100%. We're gonna make you play all 38 weeks this year. You're gonna hate us that much more by this time next year. We can't wait. How do you look at the wild card? Things you've learned about it, ways you might look at utilizing it differently this coming season?
So first of all, it would have been freaking nice if somebody showed me that chart before we started last year, because I almost like flip-flopped them in my head. I don't know if I clicked the wrong one. I don't know what I was thinking. I was probably just too mad and grumpy at the whole concept at a whole, or at my team, whatever it was. But I used the wild card instead of the free hit. And then so I pretty much ended up wasting my wild card. And then after that, obviously now you cannot fix major mistakes that you've done in your squad building. See, I think kind of like what Mateusz says, it is a fine balance, and it kind of like falls back on you. I mean, we will talk in future episodes about like how we're going to build our own individual squads or what we come up with. I think, we're doing like the Premier League preview shows right now with yourself, Gally, and Bickler. And, we kind of have a vision for every team. We feel like, things are going to go a certain way. So you're kind of probably building your squad based on that. So once you do that, usually the first week is never, you just don't look at the first week at all. The first week is always out of whack in the Premier League. But in like 2-3 weeks, if you feel like what you envisioned for the vision for certain teams are way off, I think it is okay to hit the panic button and do the wild card and change your strategy based on what you're seeing now. Like if you thought, I don't know, let's say, oh, Fulham is going to still play the same style and, they're going to score a lot of goals. And then the first 3-4 weeks, it's not happening. And you kind of like, I don't know why you would build your team around Fulham, but let's say you did. You got to change that. And I think it's not wrong to press the panic button. But at the same time, you got to kind of see how wrong you were. Can you fix your initial misconceptions by a substitution, a change a week? Like with little tweaks, or were you way off where you're like, you know what, I just got to start all over and then just erase the whole thing and start all over? I think that's kind of like the decision you got to make based on how your season is going. Like Mateusz was giving the example of, the dude who won it and he didn't use it till the end. Well, if the dude who won it, it's a pretty good guess that he had a pretty darn good team that he didn't have to mess with it a whole lot. So, like he was raking in the points. So he's like, I'm not touching this because, I mean, I freaking captain. If I was in the top 50, and it was making it sound like I was in the top 10 or something, but if I was even in the top 50, it's thanks to Mo. And it was that decision, half emotional, half like, logical pick of Mo and like captaining him. I mean, he basically carried me towards the top the entire first half, and then the whole emotional attachment thing. And I figured he earned a spot in the starting 11 for me in my fantasy team. And yeah, he brought me down. He was like, oh yeah, well, we're going down, buddy, which is what happened. But I think, you got to decide, you're going to make mistakes, right? Or you're going to have injuries, whatever the case might be. You kind of have to gauge, I think, how big of a mistake it is and decide when you want to use your wild card that way.
Yeah, well, for those who like stories about emotional duress and trying to do the right thing and make it funny, I during one of the years in my head-to-head league, I was in like the championship game, and I should have dominated this person. My team was much better than theirs. I had one free transfer, and I didn't want to make any moves, so I jokingly picked up Barini and literally put him on the end of my bench when he was on loan at Stoke, just because I wanted him to be on a championship team. And wouldn't you can know it, he got subbed in because two of my players didn't play, and he only got 1 point because he got like a stupid yellow card. But literally, I lost my whole fucking league because I did this. Like, I'll put him on a championship team, and the guy that I had subbed him off for was like, it was like Callum Wilson or somebody that like started and scored 2 goals. It was an amazing, amazing galley moment in the history of annals of fantasy football.
Now I'm confused. Which one are we going to use as a trigger? Are we say Barini or are we going to say this?
You know what the best part about all of this is going to be? That from here on out, these moments will be even more documented. And we will be able to look back on them even better than just the story, because we will have visual proof and evidence and all of this reaction during the time.
Yeah, I've had some crazy ones. I lost a head-to-head league by a Vincent Company header late in extra time, and then like a garbage goal that killed a clean sheet by Arsenal. And literally, like within seconds, it was like the Aguero goal and everything happening at United. And literally, I'm sitting in my living room. People are texting me, "You won the league," and then like a minute later, they're like, "Somehow I think you just fucking lost the league." And I was like, I fucking hate all of you. So
I think it looks like we can have a whole freaking episode of galley therapy sessions where you just share these memories from
Bickler's. If I had a professional therapist at Bickler's hourly rate for my fantasy issues, that person would have a second or third home. So to Timucin's mistake, and I thought it was perfect that he segued into hitting the wrong button, and I actually had this screenshot ready. So when you're making your transfers, you play your wild card or free hit when you're playing the transfers. Don't be stupid and hit the no button, because they'll charge you 12 points and you'll take a negative deduction. Pay attention to whether or not you want this team to be your new permanent team or you want this to be a one-time reset. But do know that if you've made transfers already that week, if you had extra transfers saved, if you use either of these chips, you lose everything that you've done. So I've tried to make that mistake before where I make a transfer, then I play my free hit later in the week thinking that transfer I made will still be on my team. No, it reverts back to the team from the week prior. So if you're not familiar with it, click on the help button. They do have a good breakdown inside the rules, inside the fantasy site. So, well, we talk here and wrap it up, guys. I didn't want to touch on one thing with regards to the wild card. And I was listening to a podcast the other day, getting some ideas for the show, and they were talking about how this is a very unique year. So last year, the powers that be threw everybody a bone and gave everyone a second free hit, which was their way of saying, we're sorry that we've destroyed your fantasy teams by canceling matches an hour before they start, 2 days after you could have substituted those players. It was just copious amounts of arguments, probably more arguments about COVID cancellations in our Discord channel than actual arguments about the validity of COVID. And we're not going to go there, people, but it was a legitimate, back and forth of how stupid all this was when it was really just some disease stopping teams from playing. And the fact that basically anyone who was going to play Burnley got COVID. And I thought that was great, seeing that Burnley had to play so many games in a short period of time. They couldn't accumulate points and they got sent down. And guess what? Anyone who's listened to any American Scouser podcast, television show, radio show saw a smoke signal we sent up. No, we have no love for Burnley. If there's a Burnley fan listening, well, you shouldn't be playing fantasy football because no one's ever had one of your fucking players on their team. But the really interesting
thing, as American Scouser, we had already lost a huge portion of the Villa fans. It's only been 10 days since we started American Scouser TV. We've already lost a lot of Villa fans, and after today, we probably just lost all the Burnley fans.
Who's next?
Honestly, I have nothing against Burnley now that Sean Douche is gone. Sean Douche was the person that had Burnley.
I'm not rooting for Vincent Company to be a success at Burnley. Mainly because from what I hear, the people in Burnley aren't the nicest of people. So let's be honest here. There are certain places where the crowd is represented, or that the squad is represented by the crowd, and the crowd is represented by the city. And I feel like Burnley fills that void. And, I said it last week on the pod. Bring the hate, people. I have no problem with it. I will stand behind my terrible takes, just like I stand behind my bad moves in fantasy football. But where I was going with the podcast comment was that they were saying that last year we got the double free hits. And this year, their kind of gift to the fantasy world was there'll be unlimited transfers after November 12th and before December 26th. So during the World Cup, you will in essence be given another wild card. So if you think about it, you basically get 4 wild cards to use this year. You can make unlimited transfers until game week 1. That's basically a wild card. It is, because you don't, it doesn't cost you to tinker with your team after watching preseason, leading up, finding out you could pick up a player, he could get hurt, and then you can still replace him before the first match. So if you do your job right, you can set up a team for a few weeks. You ultimately have to use your wild card before the World Cup, or you lose it. So you're going to use a wild card somewhere between the first match and November 12th. Then you get unlimited transfers to get your team ready for the second half of the season that in Fantasy World starts when we come back from the break on Boxing Day on December 26th. I have notoriously used my second half wild card somewhere in January around the League Cup semifinals, moving matches, and the FA Cup matches starting to happen. There's injuries, you have AFCON, you have these different tournaments, guys going off on internationals. I really feel like this is almost like giving you an ability to come in hot at the beginning of the year with a solid team and focus on like 6-7 game weeks of who is the best matches and just try to maximize points. Throw a wild card at like week 8 to 10, maximize to the end of the World Cup. Now you go to the World Cup, you get to wild card again, and you go into the second half still having the most important chip and a team that was built knowing what the fixtures are going to come like and who got hurt at the World Cup, who got hot at the World Cup, maybe even players that get sold for January. So I feel like this unlimited transfers during the World Cup has really kind of been a game changer for me personally in my preparation, because I plan to be much more aggressive with the players I draft in to start, because I have basically 45 unlimited transfers in the first 3 months of the season that they're not going to charge me for.
I can also see a lot of people overthinking and overreacting just based on that too. You know what I mean, though? Like, you know, somebody like me, or, you know, somebody, or like Mateusz said, if you get emotional and like, you know, suddenly you're like, you know what, this is not working. I can see a lot of people saying, I got wild cards, and almost like pull the trigger a little too early too. You know what I mean?
I actually think that's what I'm trying to stop myself from. I'm trying to be more aggressive to pick a guy that I think is going to be good and say, Liverpool, City, and Arsenal have the best fixtures for the first like 6 to 8 weeks of the season. Those are players you normally want on your team anyways, because they score goals, they get clean sheets, other than Arsenal. But like, I need to like convince myself that if I make these picks, that it's the right pick, stick with those guys. Because then I think in that week 6 to 8 to 10, to Mateusz's point, when you can actually see what's happening, when injuries start happening, I think that's where you can really pick up a lot of points by not hitting that panic button early. Mateusz, how do you think the unlimited transfers during the World Cup will affect your use of the wild card and or your structure of your initial drafted team?
I think it almost eases my mind a little bit, knowing that I'm going to get that opportunity in a couple months to hit the reset button if need be. So to your point where you're talking about aggressively going after the players you really want, I feel like that gives you the advantage of just wanting to do exactly what you're planning to do. And so I think when I'm thinking about the World Cup and thinking about all those limited transfers, I myself, just like you, I'm going to go in with the vision that I have, the plan that I have, and I'm going to stick to it. And I'm going to stick to the wild card that I'm thinking about, and like you mentioned, in that 8 to 12 range, depending on what's going on, and then kind of ride that out and then get the opportunity to reset if need be, or just look back and see where I can go from there. I think it's going to open up a lot of possibilities to play the game a little bit differently. And I think to Timucin's point, there might be, on the flip side, a bit of that overthinking that comes with it, especially if someone has a really good World Cup. There are some players who play really well for their country and don't play well for their club. So you're going to see possibly someone playing out of their mind in the World Cup come back to the club thinking, all right, they're going to hit the ground running from here, and they don't see any playing time, like Genie. So, I mean, a different league now, of course, but it's one of those things where, you know, it's nice to have the ability to have all those unlimited transfers in the middle during the winter, but at the same time, like, I don't want to invest too much thought into how they perform in the World Cup specifically to have that cater to what I want to do for the rest of the season, because it's still two different beasts when you think of club and international play.
Yeah, I feel like the only real advantage of the World Cup, I mean, there's no advantage, let's be totally honest, to have this joke of a World Cup in the middle of the winter. Why we're not sitting at home right now watching the World Cup. We should be talking about the World Cup. We should be excited about the World Cup. We'd be into the knockout stages right now. It would be just heaven. I'd have one more excuse not to go to work and hang out with the dog.